All right, guys. So first of all, thanks for coming to my talk. I know it's been a long, exhausting 2 days, and especially after yesterday's party. So I'm really glad that you came to listen about stylized graphics. So today we're going to talk about stylized graphics and how to make your game stand out. I prepared several reasons how to make your game stand out and share some of techniques that I used. So yeah. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Michał Orzełek. I'm a CG generalist, primarily working in Unreal Engine. I've been around for over a decade now, doing some lot of stuff here and there, but you may recognize me from my work like at the Advanced Glass Material Pack. And sometimes I hear, oh, you're that glass guy. Yes, kinda. I'm also a co-founder of Unreal Bucket, an asset management and collaboration platform specifically for Unreal users. So if you don't know the project, it is free for you to download if you're Unreal users. But most importantly, I'm a nerd and I like shaders. So that's why 2 years ago I joined Gruby, or like some people like to say, Gruby, entertainment as technical artists, and we are working on our first game, Deadling. So let me show you a quick teaser.
Are you with us, son? Good. The agency requested your assistance to educate some corps by paying them a visit. Your arrival won't go unnoticed. Get warmed up. Put some lowlifes out of their misery.
What you're looking at is a fast-paced cyberpunk arena shooter with some roguelike elements. So think of them like a mashup between Doom Eternal and Hades.
Let them try.
So you actually play as a humanoid combat shell and fight against mega corporations, so you kill with style. So currently game is in early access, but if you are into serious FPS, you should definitely check it out. So yeah, Deadling, check it out. So I think it's a good moment to give the team behind the game a quick shout out. It's a team, and actually some of them are sitting here. So yeah, Gruby is a small independent studio, but with lots of talent and lots of experience, and I'm really glad that I could join the team at the early stage of the production. So I'm going to be using Deadling as our reference and show some of the techniques that I used to achieve this visual style. So short agenda, we'll start with theory. I'm going to share some reasons why to choose stylized graphics at the first place, at least in my opinion. Then we'll dive into more practical examples, and I'll show you some ingredients of Deadling's visual style, including shaders, a mesh, lighting, and other things that all makes that visual style. And if we have some time left, then we go some questions. So yeah, the main question is, why is stylized graphics better than photorealistic? So we need to take a look at some facts first. So the number of video games released has been growing rapidly due to the rise of independent developers. Moreover, current game engines like Unreal, Unity offer tools and technologies that only AAA studio could use before. Even the pandemic affected gaming. You know the butterfly effect theory? Now we are kind of experiencing the bat effect, but don't quote me on that. So actually, COVID situation changed how we consume content, and gaming quickly emerged as one of the most popular activities during lockdowns, right? So now, if you trust the Statista portal, only in 2022 alone, we could play 11,000 new games. That's approximately 30 games released every single day, and that's on Steam only. I mean, that's just crazy. So yeah, lots of games, lots of competition, overcrowded market. And additionally, with all those marketplaces and scan libraries like Quixel Megascan that offer high-quality content, often for free, it all makes photorealistic graphic more accessible than ever before. So now, creating a game with a unique art style can help you to stand out in already crowded marketplace and appeal to a broader audience of players, especially younger one. So let me show you several more reasons why to choose stylized graphics. So stylized graphics are often preferred over photorealistic because they allow for more creative freedom and can convey more specific mood or aesthetic more effectively. So like the artist can exaggerate colors, textures to create more memorable visual experiences. Then we must not forget that we are creating a game. And with stylized graphics, we are not limited to real-world constraints, some laws, like the scale of the objects doesn't have to be accurate, or we can alter how lighting bounces off surfaces with different fancy shaders. So yeah, stylized graphics offer way more freedom, and this effectively can become, the gameplay can become more imaginative and playful, and can affect more players. And realistic graphics, on the other hand, demand perfection. And even the slightest visual glitches can ruin your immersion, which I hate, by the way. So yeah, it demands perfection, and yeah. Another thing that is usually overlooked during the development is that the technical limitations. And stylized graphics are often less demanding on hardware than photorealistic graphic. It can be a more viable option for games that need to run, on low-end PCs or some mobile devices. Stylized graphics just age better, right? So I'm sure that you remember that playing a video game like Tomb Raider as a kid, and you thought, damn, this graphic is so great, nothing can beat that. Well, we can be certain one thing. We can't be certain that nothing can beat that. And finally, resources, your budget, your dev team capacity. It may sound a bit counterintuitive to what I said about photorealistic graphic accessibility, but still, if you're not into developing another asset flip game, you should consider having a bigger budget and 3D team of experienced artists to make all the content. So now, let me show you several games that, in my opinion, perfected the stylized graphics, and I bet you will immediately tell the game's name, and you can shout it, just by looking at the screenshot. Limbo. Of course it's Limbo. Somebody heard Mario? No. Okay, so another random FPS. Yes, it's Doom. Yes, one of my favorite, stylized graphics. It's so perfected in the animation, everything is spotless. The list goes on, so you can just see and check, the screenshot and tell how this game was made. It's amazing, so several more examples. I'm sure you know this game. Yeah. So that's funny because we internally use the screenshot effect term at Gruby, and I'm not sure who came up with the name, but it really makes sense when you think about it. So the goal is to make game look unique. It sounds simple, right? Well, it is not. It's like thinking of entirely new color, which is pretty much impossible. It is impossible. But luckily with games, we have much more at our disposal. So like art directors can deliberately make choices about color palettes, textures, shaders, post-processing, you name it. So yeah, stylized graphics involves taking risks, doing some experiments, checking out different approaches. It is a complex process, but it is a really rewarding one if you capture players' attention with your final product. So now, let me show you some of the ingredients that make the Deadlink visual style. And we'll start with, you guessed it, shaders. There is no game without shaders, right? So when I first saw the concept of the game, I quickly realized that we needed some sort of flexible material system. A system that will allow you for swift prototyping, checking out new ideas, how to approach that comic style that we aim for. Yeah, so these are like early concepts. So since I knew we can mess around with PBR, with stylized art, I knew that I can play with the shader as I wanted. That's great. So we started simple with the most fundamental things like color, metallic roughness. So yeah, don't take screenshot of this. But yeah, we use that shaders just to separate different surfaces. So you get the feeling of colors and space and so on But we kept adding features. And yeah, that's actually the master shader for most of our meshes. So one of the most essential features was rim light. And I'm pretty much sure if you've ever been interested in photography or rendering, you probably heard about rim lights. So rim light is an effect achieved with usually 3-point lighting setup. A rim light is placed behind an object to expose outline, mainly with color and with high contrast. So that's the same concept that I tried to implement in our master shaders. So basically allowing an artist to add up to 3 rim lights to an object procedurally, so he can then later match with surrounding environment by changing its color, softness, mask, and so on. And here's an example blueprint that I created just to see how rim lights work on various meshes, like on tire. So yeah, it's pretty much cheap and nice way to add stylized lighting to your objects. And this is based on emissive, so yeah. And apparently, breaking down PBR rules doesn't help, and we quickly realized that we need some sort of an actor-level control to, control the rim lights effect. So we won't end up with hundreds and hundreds of material instances with different rim lights setup. And if you are familiar with Unreal Engine, you've probably heard about primitive data. It was a godsend because we could literally control the effect on a per actor, per mesh basis. Just reducing the rim lights like on the stairs because it was just too intense and so on. Yes, cringe alert. This will occasionally pop up. I made some pro tips. And for this primitive data, just make a doc or spreadsheet with all primitive data that you use to avoid so-called cross-material issues. What I mean by that is when you have at least 2 materials that have variables that use primitive data, then if you apply material instances to a single mesh and change primitive data, you will find hard time what's going on, or you can actually forget what the primitive data was all about. So yeah, it's a good idea just to list them down. So rim lights is a procedural effect that you can apply in your material instance. And speaking of procedural effects, our next step for the shader was to add, extra detail. We wanted to make things dirty. So as a result, I made 4 different effects you can procedurally and independently control, and all are based on seamless/tileable RGB-packed masks with triplanar mapping support. So these effects are great for adding, floor dirt, which is essential, for the ground detail, like when you want to add puddles, oil stains, whatever, may be landing on the ground level. So as you can see, it not only affects the base color, but also roughness, metallic, specular. Another procedural effect that is within the same master shader is wall dirt, and it's great for vertical detail, like if you want to separate different materials from one another, like concrete, metal, plastic. This is just like tileable noises, scratches, and everything that make that surface. Then we have a bottom gradient, a very subtle way of blending to help to blend buildings with pavements, roads. And again, you can control the effect with primitive data. So on a per mesh basis, actually. So like if you want to change the color, fall off. And finally, we have leaks, another extra detail that you can intentionally turn on and specify where the leaks happen, or you expect such leaks to happen by controlling the mask offset, and again with primitive data. So that kind of brings us to another pro tip, which is create a simple utility widget for your team to actually help them with setting up those primitive data, because there is a slight chance that they wouldn't use it otherwise, or wrong. Our next big step was to make materials for enemies. And since Deadlink is a FPS, we knew that enemies has to be visible. So you basically know that you are shooting an enemy, not a trash can or whatever. So what I did is I went with quite aggressive Fresnel effect, so to create sort of like outline, so you can control like how thick it is, how thin it is. You can pick a color, and actually it's based on 2 masks that scale with camera distance. So yeah, it's definitely helped to improve clarity of enemy contours, silhouettes, and improve the visibility in general. So you can actually set per mesh, per material, per enemy material, when you want to make him pop up more at certain distance from the player. So it's a really great way to make it more visible, especially in very dark spots. So you can see in the 2000 Unreal units, there is this glowing effect already happening. Then another effect that is put on top of that is marking effect. And if you played Deadlink, the marking is essential to your survivor because killing a marked enemy, he drops ammo, shield, grenades. So anything that is actually essential to your survivor during the gameplay. So we needed from the early stage that it has to be like very visible. So what I did is I applied an effect like a glowing aura based on some noise patterns, and that works together with word position offset. So the logic is pretty much simple because it's like blending different masks together that are multiplying or adding, you're just layering them down. And what's really nice or important to use is that you have to use pre-skin local position node in order to actually have a projection on skeletal meshes. But as a side tip, you can also use that pre-skin local position on your static meshes to get really nice projection that is locked to the object. So yeah, once again, this effect also includes custom stencil for the meshes. So they actually utilize another post-process material that even makes them more visible. And of course, there are more shaders in the game that was created for specific reasons, like glowing things, like some procedural patterns and so on. But those 2 I mentioned before cover like 90% of our needs for the meshes, so I just won't go into details about that. So that brings us to mesh pipeline. So if you are technical artists, you mostly tell other people in your art department how to create art or things that, sometimes they agree with you, sometimes they don't. But yeah, that's just like a regular day. So yeah, I created a workflow in my head and I shared with them and they were happy. Why? Because I'm not sure if you noticed, but I didn't say anything about textures. I mean, object-specific textures that you would normally need for PBR workflow, like normal maps, metallic or roughness maps, and so on. So we actually don't need that. We don't use UVs at all. So now if I went to 3D artist and say, you know what, you don't have to use UVs. He was like, yes, finally. So we could drop the unwrapping and texture map baking process completely with this approach. So this essentially speed up the process of assets, but also made it non-destructive. So what I mean by that, so take this metal crate as an example. So usually or normally, if you would like to create multiple variations of that crate, you would send the asset to an artist, like to Substance Painter or whatever, rebake the textures, re-import them, or just have some fancy logic based on masks, But with this approach, you can actually create multiple variations of that mesh pretty much effortless. So all it takes is just swapping different materials together, and you've got with that magic of procedural effect, you've got the illusion that your content is much richer. Of course, the only downside is that you end up with having more material slots because we utilize more material slots to separate different colors instead of relying on those PBR textures. But since Deadlink is more or less limited to a single arena for most of the time, having more material slots on a single mesh, it should be okay. And of course, we introduced some optimization steps to reduce those materials flown at distances. So you should be more okay with that. All right, so since we don't use object-specific normal maps, we had to incorporate denser geometry to our meshes. So like for example, you see this detail is all based on geometry, not on normal maps, like you would normally expect. But this workflow, mid-poly workflow, actually helped us because it made extra bevels to our geometry and actually made the rim lights more pronounced. And we also wanted to get away with, that effect that the game was developed in the 90s or something. So yeah, of course, we introduced later some LODs that Unreal Engine automatically generated. It's just pretty good workflow. And one last thing about meshes, we used modular approach as much as we possibly could. I know it's repeated all the time, but this kind of left us room for future modification and detail passes. And like in this example, when we wanted to improve the layout of this floor or change its design, we basically just swapped a single tile, which is like 500 by 500, perfectly positioned pivot, grid snapping, did really good job. And that brings us to lighting, which is, it's an interesting one, and it's the most challenging topic of the game, I think. I really struggled to find a way how we should approach the lighting and how to give our art director the control that he needed, especially given the fact that each biome has its unique vibe and lighting and mood and so on. And just so you know, Deadlink is a roguelite, and all levels are procedurally generated every time you play. So the composition and the layout of the map is changing. So we couldn't use the local post-process. We couldn't use, skylight that drives the scene's vibe in this particular arena. So we had to come up with some clever or solution that would actually make the lighting consistent across all arenas. So what and actually the lighting in Deadlink is completely dynamic, so we don't use any baked light maps or real-time global illumination techniques like ray tracing or LPV or whatever. So what I did is I took all elements that actually make the specific biome vibe, and let's call it like light blueprint or vibe blueprint, and that includes like skylight, post-process volume, all post-process materials, fog, and other things that defines in a way lightness/darkness baseline that the artist can start working on. So this is like a starting point for Tora biome. It's like a very dark Tokyo street arenas. So since our master shader uses emissive, you see that it's not completely dark, but we didn't want to have like fully blown up exposure. So it's like that's the baseline that artists start to work with. And we started with adding key lights, essentially just to drive the scene's vibe or to guide players' attention to more interesting or important from gameplay perspective areas. And at first, I wasn't convinced by the look of those heart-shaped spotlights because it kind of felt different. But the more I played the game, the better it felt because I'm gonna admit it looks just more characteristic, more distinctive. And the same goes with this heart-shaped light cones that simulate some sort of a volumetric effects in arena, especially in the third biome interport. So the next step was actually to add fill lights, just to illuminate darker spots, or just to fake bounced lighting. And usually we used point lights with short attenuation radius. We dropped the fall-off component, and actually we just tried to cheat and fake how lights work in Unreal Engine. So kind of hoping that we can change how it blends, but yeah, we failed. So we kind of needed like a solution that would affect lighting locally. And like I said, because we have the baseline, the darkness baseline level, so nothing can go darker than that. So especially when we wanted to make things darker locally, and spoiler alert, this is just like a hidden room that you can find in the second biome, what? And yeah, here we wanted to create more dramatic lighting. So the system that I created effectively helped us, but also the other way around. When we wanted to affect fake global lighting or just add, final touches to the scene. I'm not sure if you get, yeah. So you can see I can literally paint with the lighting, and even if this light is destructive, you can, disable the intensity of this. So actually, it's like a great control to manually paint with lighting. So what I did is I created a blueprint system based on decals and adjustable masks. So all you have to do is just drag and drop a blueprint onto your level, choose a mask, specify some softness and other parameters like color, and you're basically done. So it's a really great way to locally affect your faked bounce lighting or paint with lighting. Another pro tip, make child blueprints with predefined settings, and especially it's true for blueprints that has a lot of parameters like in this case. So it actually helps with iteration, so you don't have to specify the same parameters again and again, especially that we have more biomes that have different color palettes. So yeah, it's always a good idea to create multiple child blueprints, and there's also a chance that your art director won't broke it. So yeah, like I said, the light blueprint also works on shadows or with shadows. So it's a great way to add like a local smooth shadows without light maps, without baking those soft shadows. So it can actually simulate, the soft shadows like ambient occlusion. And for a second, you saw that the shadow went completely sharp. And also, this is also a good, let's say, way to simulate a shadow, especially those cast by small objects. And I'm sure you know that getting those small shadows, especially cast like this, these pieces, is pretty much impossible. There's always this tiny, small gap between an object and surface, and not to mention that shadow goes home every time you just you are too far from the object. Yeah? Like surprise shadow caster. So yeah, let's say the last part was just to play the game, play the level, and see if anything needs manual adjustment. So we have this baseline level. Then we have key lights, fill lights, those fake decals. So yeah, especially on curved meshes like this wall or pillar, whatever, we kind of realize that, okay, this needs to be totally turned off because the rim lights just doesn't work here, or we would need to create extra material instances just for this particular mesh. Of course, there were other situations that we kind of needed like a custom approach, like in the Tora biome. What I did here is just used a simple 3D plane with additive material and gradient. That's it. So yeah, that's pretty much summarizes the lighting approach that we had in the game. It was really iterative process, and it was quite difficult to get that, artistic feeling. And I've got 2 more topics if we have time. Yeah. So like I said, each biome has a very specific set of material or post-process material, and one post-process material was just used to simulate the fake fog effect that blends with level vertically only. It was a great way to actually, visualize the artificial roof. And what's nice about this effect is that we could lock the position, so it wouldn't work like a regular fog, but it would just, chop off the level, so we wouldn't have to build the ceiling, the roof, etc. Another interesting effect that is completely done on post-process material. It's a single blueprint that has lots of parameters that you can animate on timeline and so on. So this effect triggers every time you start the game or you are transferred into another biome. So we kind of needed, an effect that will trigger some sort of a simulation. Yeah, so it is just like a fancy combination between object mapping and triplanar mapping and world mapping, together with some animated and pan textures together. Yeah, so what I just showed you are several ingredients that you can use in your games. And I just also shared several reasons why to choose stylized graphics over photorealistic graphics. But, you know, you are a developer. You are an inspiring one. You just created a game dev studio. So if you had one shot, one opportunity to seize everything you ever wanted, one moment, would you capture it or just let it sleep? And I'm sure you pretty much know that you would do anything you do the best to make your game stand out. And with stylized graphics, you actually can do it. So thank you, and questions.
So we have a lot of time for questions, so please.
Yes, it was Limbo.
Yeah, I think I know that. I'm not certain. So I was thinking it was Inside for a moment, but sorry for that. But to the question, actually. So if I understood correctly, you have like a single master material that basically procedurally generates grunge and things like dirt and stuff. But you showed that screen of boxes with different material instances, and you said that you have different material slots for different colors, etc. But you also had nice texts on those boxes,
yes.
And you said you don't have UVs. So I kind of like, can you tell like how you actually put those
texts, right?
Yes, on the boxes.
Yeah, that's actually, I was against this approach, but our art director really forced us to do it because these are meshed based. These are literally polygons on top of that with a little gap between, you know, the surface. And just to fully answer your questions, we also have like a simplified version of our master shader, so it doesn't have to, you know, use all those procedural effects if we don't need them.
Okay. So a very quick follow-up. The fighting with those or not?
No, actually it worked kind of better than the regular mesh decals because we tried this approach and yeah, like you would expect that it would just flicker around. But with this approach, if you have a proper gap between that is not noticeable from other angles, you're okay with that. Okay, thank you.